Thank you, Peter, for coming on today. Appreciate that.
Delighted to be with you.
So as Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning and the Chief Futures Officer, so what is a futurist?
Great question. My job is to help people make better decisions about the future in the face of uncertainty.
Okay.
We live in a time of enormous uncertainty, and the truth is that's been true for quite a few years, right? Changes in technology, the politics, economy, society, all of these things make decision-making extremely complex. My job is to help decision makers do a better job of that by trying to imagine what the future might be like and what the consequences of their decisions might be like in those different futures.
So we live in the age of AI, artificial intelligence, and now people are talking about agentic AI, autonomous agents. How would they reshape the future?
This is probably the single biggest technological revolution of my lifetime.
After the web? Not even?
Oh, way more important than the web. Look, I'm 78 years old. I'll be 79 in a couple months.
Okay.
So I've seen the whole thing. I started my career at Stanford Research Institute in the early 1970s. It was one of the two hubs of AI research. It was MIT and Stanford. Right? We had the first robots and so on. In fact, you can see our robot in the Smithsonian. It's called Shaky. It was not very adept. We've come a very long way, but I saw the beginnings of the microchip, the PC, the web takeoff, the smartphone, all of that. This is much bigger than that. This is probably the biggest revolution we have seen. It will change the world quite fundamentally. The world will be a different place a few years from now because of what's now happening with AI and agentic capabilities.
And why is that?
The utility and the ability to create, for example, digital employees, right? So Singapore, for example, has a labor shortage, right? And that's been true for actually a long time, right? You've had to import labor from the region to do a lot of things like construction jobs and so on. But now we're also beginning to run into white-collar jobs that we're short of labor.
Right.
And you can try to invite immigrants, or you can build digital employees and expand your workforce with the capabilities of AI. And I think that is what's just beginning to happen. And as a result, within a couple of years, most every manager in Singapore in one role or another will have human employees, and they'll have digital employees to extend their capabilities.
Right. So for the human employee, will their jobs be displaced? I've heard that their jobs will be augmented, but again, people do quibble about the word augment. They think that displacement is more likely.
Well, for most jobs, initially, it is going to be augmentation. So if you have a kind of managerial role, one of the things that the AI will do for you is take care of all the busy work. Fill out your expense reports, organize your travel reports, take care of the kind of back room that is really annoying. And so you can focus on the things that really matter, working with customers, working with your colleagues, and so on, being creative. So you're not spending a lot of time doing busy work. That's what the AIs were invented for initially. So at first, most of the applications are going to be those things, extending capability and taking the friction out of life. Eventually, we will get to some places where we will actually eliminate jobs. And probably the very first of those will be in call centers. Right? Because one of the things that agents are particularly good at is handling those kinds of service inquiries. You know, I can't find my password. My package hasn't arrived.
How do I reset this thing? How do I reboot?
You got it, exactly. And these are the things that agents do very well. So people call centers asking for help, but about 80 to 90% of those calls can be handled by an agent. Now, at first, it's actually just going to speed up the response. So you'll get to a human being a bit faster when you need to. The human beings will be more empowered to get information and support more quickly with agents. But eventually, the agents will begin to do more and more of it. We'll still keep humans, call it roughly 20% of the call center, for those things that the agent can't resolve.
What does it mean for the new people joining the workforce for the first time? So new graduates, for example.
Well, first of all, it's very important in education, right? So we start right there because, frankly, kids going to school today are already beginning to use AI in a variety of ways. And what they are super tutors. They are helpful to you in carrying out the basic tasks of education, research, learning. All of those kinds of things are improved with agents. Particularly, frankly, for the lower half of the class, right? They struggle in life, they struggle in school, and agents are a very powerful tool to uplift their performance. And we've shown a lot of research on how effective it is, particularly in education.
Right.
So students coming out of school before too long are all going to have had experience working alongside agents that help them through their school experience.
But they won't have the work experience. So for example, if I want to become an investment banker,
Right.
The low-level, entry-level jobs, Mr. Robot has taken over. Mr.
Maybe.
AI has
It'll
taken
maybe eventually get there, but it's going to be a while before they're good enough to do that.
But it means that I won't be able to gain the skills needed to be a middle manager where the human is really needed.
Well, I think that's a fear, but I'm not sure it's valid, to be candid.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of discussion about eliminating those jobs at the bottom. But the truth is, what tends to happen is if you're successful in improving the productivity, you grow the business enough that you're creating more jobs anyway. So the net is you're probably winding up with similar levels of employment. The roles change and
Yes.
evolve as they go forward,
Yep.
and that the trivial tasks get carried out by the AIs. But even at the bottom, you still have people who have to relate to other people, and that's still best done by humans.
How do we read the signs, for you as a futurist? How do you read the signs that this job is going to be displaced or new skills are needed?
Well, truth is, it's a hard question, right? Because the technology is still pretty new. I mean, this stuff is, the really big leaps have been only in the last 18 months or
Yes,
so.
yeah.
And the pace of change is so fast that it is actually very hard to know, to be candid. The things that are most obvious are the things that are really routine and mechanical and can
Right.
be handled fairly straightforward. For example, managing inventory in a warehouse, right? The AI can track the inventory, know what's going on, report it out easily, so you don't have to have a person walking around
With
with
a
a
clipboard.
clipboard. Exactly. You understand perfectly.
Yeah.
So I think those kinds of jobs are probably the most vulnerable.
Right. Okay. So is governance important for AI?
Governance is a critical issue for AI. Look, this is very powerful technology, and it's new enough that we don't really fully understand how it's going to be used, both for the opportunity side as well as to be appropriate in terms of the governance. To ask questions about what the impacts are, how this works, what the consequences are. I think the key to governance is transparency, making sure that all the data is accessible, all the training data is understood, the mechanics of it, how it's being deployed, and the opportunity to interrogate it to assure that it isn't producing unwanted results.
We don't know all of that yet. We don't have answers to all of that yet.
That's right. It's new enough, and the truth is we don't.
Right. Okay. So going back to the book,
Yes.
The Art of the Long View, which you wrote and published in 1991.
Correct.
That is, 36 years or so
It's
ago.
amazing to me it's still in print.
It's in print, okay. So you have said in the book that scenario planning isn't about the future. It is about improving planning for the present.
Correct.
Can you elaborate on that? How do you translate that long-term foresight into actionable strategies?
Sure. I mean, it's a great question. And the goal here is not getting the future right. That's easy, frankly. If you do multiple scenarios and you do your homework well, among your scenarios, you're almost certainly going to find the future.
Right.
Occasionally, I've been surprised, but rarely. The real thing you want to do is design your scenarios to inform a set of decisions and choices you have to make.
Okay.
Right? Business decisions, personal decisions, healthcare decisions, all of those, you lead to looking at different scenarios, and then you take your decision and run it through each scenario. Take scenario A, and if I make my decision, how will it play out in that scenario?
Could you give an example?
Well, you think about economic policy, right? And so the question is, how rapidly should you invest in, say, new infrastructure? And that's a function of growth, that's a function of interest rates, that's a function of competition, and so on. So you want to put environmental issues. So you want to put together a set of scenarios that look at those factors and come up with 3 different views of the future.
Right.
And then take your investment plan, say building, say, new roads, and say, do we need more roads in scenario A, scenario B, or scenario C? And then say, what are the risks of getting it right? What are the risks of getting it wrong? And how should I modify my decision to minimize the risks and maximize the benefits of that choice.
Do you decide for each of these scenarios, or you pick one and you say, this is what I want, and therefore?
Well, that's one possibility. There's sometimes a situation where the goal is to create a scenario, right? But the truth is, most of the time, it's a specific choice that you actually want to test against multiple scenarios.
Okay. And so when the world changes so rapidly, as in this case, you know, AI changes daily.
Exactly.
Right? How do you plan for all of that?
That's one of the toughest moments we've ever had, to be honest. I mean, the truth is, look, when I was in Shell doing scenario planning, our time frame was decades, right? If you're talking about oil fields and refineries and stuff like that, you have decades to think about. Not true with AI. Now the pace of change is that what will be true a year from now is different from today, and so on. So what it means is you have to do continuous thinking. It isn't like you do it once and then you go away and come back in a few years. By then the world's a new place.
Right.
So the truth is you need this kind of constant thinking to assure the resilience of your decision making in the face of it. So you're actually kind of constantly, almost, I don't want to say daily, but constantly looking at the forces and seeing which way the scenarios may be evolving, because it's pretty easy to be surprised in this kind of environment.
So then as you take in all of these developments, you start to tweak. So you wrote a compendium, a sort of an update to that book, learnings from the book. Would you want to elaborate on that? What were some of your learnings?
Look, you know, I didn't always get things right. And so a few years after the book came out, we published an ebook on Amazon called Learnings from the Long View. And it is actually looking at my biggest mistakes. And there was one unequivocal lesson. There were a few, but the biggest one was almost every time I got the future wrong, it was because of a lack of diversity. We were just talking to ourselves. It was this, you know, people who shared the same views, same set of information, and just reinforced our own views. I'll give you a concrete example. I had a group of customers in Mexico City in 1994 looking at the future of Mexico. Right? A new president had just been elected, Ernesto Zedillo. Everybody was very optimistic about the future. It was going to be really incredible. Everything was going to turn around. Beautiful future coming. We had a group of Mexican economists and political leaders in the room who advised us, and we developed 3 scenarios for the future of Mexico and their economic market. Right? We had a good, better, and best scenario. Unfortunately, 2 weeks later, the Mexican economy collapsed. And we got it totally wrong. I mean, it was embarrassingly wrong. And our customers were not too pleased with the results.
And the reason for that was?
Everybody in that group that we brought in as experts all knew each other, all talked to each other, and they were just simply reinforcing the same view. We didn't have a real divergent view among the people that we were calling on to advise us.
So the lesson is have as diverse a group as possible.
Precisely right. Okay. That forces you to think about different possibilities.
Right. And you look at the proliferation of data and information today, you know, how do you differentiate between the noise and the signals?
That's actually pretty hard. The truth is, there's an enormous amount of information. So, for me, it's a matter of experience. I'm an information junkie, right? And so the really way it happens is I test it with my colleagues, right? I get a lot of information, they get a lot of information. We have a small scenario team, for example, in Salesforce, and we talk literally every day. We share information. This morning I was just reading a really interesting article that one of my team sent me via Slack to read. You know, we have a Slack working group where we are able to collaborate in real time all the time. And so we're kind of constantly testing each other. Yes, that's important. No, that's not important. And so the truth is we've built up a body of experience that allows us to sort among all of the information that we're getting and focus on what we think are the most important. We don't always get it right, but most of the time we're pretty good about that.
So do you have, say, at your back pocket, this is the scenario, you know, we're going to, that will take us forward. Do you then take this and then say we tweak it with the information that we get every day?
I wouldn't put it quite that way. What I'd say is, yes, I do think, I've been at this for 50 years, so I think that way all the time. Yeah. So I work very closely with our CEO, and if he says, so what do you think is going to happen in India, right? And I may have given some thought to that already, and I'll begin that process. But it really is a strategic conversation. It's not a fixed answer. It is, here's the beginning of it. Now we start talking to our head of India, And then we talk to other people, we have outside advisors, and we begin a conversation of developing multiple views and test. How much are we going to invest in India? Where are we going to do it? Which technologies are we going to develop there, and so on?
Okay, just looking forward the next 5-10 years, what are the emerging technologies you see?
Well, obviously the first one that is really big is artificial intelligence. It's happening right now, and agents. And that will lead in the not too distant future to robotics, right? Agents with bodies are robots. That's basically what they're...
Are you talking about humanoids, or are we talking about the Boston Dynamics type of robot?
Neither. I'm talking about industrial scale robots. You already see the beginnings of the security robots that wander around buildings here already. But we'll have many kinds of robots that do specific tasks that are designed for particular functions in factories, in service, in banks, in restaurants, and so on. So we'll see a lot of that. We've actually, I think maybe Din Tai Fung already has robots. Yes. So we'll see lots of those. Eventually we'll see humanoid robots. But the truth is, useful humanoid robots are still pretty hard to make. Most of it will be, frankly, a stunt for quite some time.
What about AGI?
Very good question. We focus not so much on AGI as EGI. Enterprise general intelligence. The worry about AGI is it can go very far and cause potentially issues. EGI focuses only on those things that matter to an enterprise: accounting, inventory, bookkeeping, those kinds of things. So the scope for problems is radically diminished. It might give you a wrong answer, but it's not going to come up with something crazy that you end up having a real problem with. So we bound the kind of software we develop on enterprise general intelligence. Okay,
and are we near that?
Probably call it a couple of years. It's, 18 months to 2 years. It's that kind of time frame. It's moving very, very fast.
So apart from AI, what else are you seeing? What other technologies?
Well, so one that people talk a lot about, which I think is going to take much longer, is quantum computing. I think eventually we get there, but it's still a science project. One of the big things, of course, that is really emerging now is space. Right? Thanks to Elon Musk and his reusable rockets, we are now beginning to develop a real space economy. That is a big leap. Once you started landing rockets, it changed everything. That really opened up the space age. So that's another one. Huge one is renewable energy, right? We have a big global climate change problem. So we're going to be investing enormously in first solar and wind, but the one that I'm really excited about is fusion.
Nuclear.
For a long time, there was a dream of fusion. Well, now it's increasingly practical. There's a company outside of Boston, spun out of MIT, called Commonwealth Fusion. And they're starting to build the first demonstration plants outside of Virginia, mostly to deal with data centers, I might add. But it is the first fusion plants. If we are successful at fusion, that's a game-changing technology for all of humanity.
But isn't that something a culture, a value that you need to address because of the negative sentiments around nuclear?
Well, nuclear fission, there's been always a sense of risk because you have waste problems, you have uranium and so on. Those do not exist with fusion power. There's no nuclear waste. There's nothing that can go wrong. It can't blow up and become Chernobyl. Fusion is basically inherently safe. And so that's another huge change. And then a big one, of course, is in medicine, right? If we're looking at the world 5 to 10 years from now, the pace of evolution in biology, also helped by AI, frankly, we're able to do drug research much more effectively. We're going to see enormous improvements in things like cancer, heart disease, diabetes. We're astonished by the effect of these anti-weight drugs, the GLP-1 drugs. Not only do they help you lose weight, but they seem to do many other things as well. I'm contemplating taking it, not because of weight, but my doc says that it might help your knees and it might help other things as well. So it seems to be almost a miracle drug. So my guess is 5 years from now, for example, we'll see a lot fewer fat people. No, it's true. I already see it in my neighborhoods in California. People are shrinking. And it's a remarkably effective new drug. So that's another whole domain that we're likely to see major change.
So healthcare is going to be healthcare and medicine.
Yes,
it's going to change. So do you think precision medicine will come about from
It's already beginning.
It's already beginning.
And again, their AI is very helpful because it can do the analytics of all the data coming from every test and make recommendations and also control things like drug distribution in the body in very precise ways.
So what would, you have been at it for 50 years.
Yes.
So what would you tell a new graduate coming to the workforce or a young student going into university? How would you prepare for the future?
Well, the most important thing is actually empathy in human relations. Look, the robots and machines will be able to do a lot of things, but they will never be very good at relating to other people. Right. They will not be leaders of other people. They will not be guides and teachers for other people. They'll be useful, help, aids, but the thing that is uniquely human is empathy. So what I think is that people need to develop all the skills associated with emotional intelligence as much as intellectual intelligence.
What's your secret for living a healthy, long life? You are 78, you said.
Yes, I am. You know, being focused on the future helps a lot. No, it's true. I dream big.
Okay.
And so I have huge aspirations. I have had the good fortune of a life that has turned out reasonably well. I joined Salesforce at age 65. Yes, in 2011 is when I joined Salesforce. I had no reason to start a new career, but Mark Benioff asked me to join him and work with him, and he's a giant, and the company is amazing. So here it is. I thought I might be here 2 years, you know, at that age, right? Retire at 67. No, here it is, 78, and he won't let me retire. But the truth is, it's so exciting, it keeps me alive. The truth is, it was getting a bit boring about 5 years ago. And now, all the AI stuff, the whole world is changing. So the opportunity to participate in this technology revolution is what really keeps me going.
Right. Thank you very much, Peter, for this conversation. That was
my pleasure. Thank you.